Mute everybody. Okay. I'm so honored. I see Laura here and Dana. I didn't, somebody else, Elaine, a few people have joined and iPad 2 and iPad 3. I haven't seen you guys in so long. I've been wondering when I was going to see iPad 2 again. So welcome. Hi. I'm going to start with a little comment from someone who was a former intern in the Supreme Court, a clerk, I guess is the correct word. And he spoke on the occasion of RBG's passing about a year and several months ago, as you well remember. And this is what he said. The first time I met Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was during my clerkship for the late Justice John Paul Stevens in the year 2000. There's a tradition of justices inviting clerks from the other chambers for an informal get together at least once during the term. Justice Ginsburg invited the Stevens clerk to tea in her chambers. Prominently displayed on a wall outside her office was a framed poster with the words from Parshat Shoftim, "Justice, justice shall you pursue." The repetition of the word justice has always been powerful to me. The passage is taken from a longer description in Deuteronomy of the kinds of judges that God wanted the Israelites to appoint. Honest judges who would not pervert justice in favor of the wealthy or the well-connected, but who would pursue equal justice fearlessly, with particular concern for the marginalized, the poor, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner. These are direct quotes from Torah, those words. Justice Ginsburg's life and career embody this rich ideal. This particular gentleman who wrote this is now, and I don't recall the name, but he's been recently appointed the president of a university, and his name is Eduardo Peñalver, which is an unusual Spanish name. Uh, I That quote might evoke for some of you an image. I know my husband's a lawyer, and he had in his big when he was in a larger office that a poster similar on his wall, and perhaps some of you have seen that as a piece of art. But for us today, it's more than a piece of art. We need to talk about this because, as I'm sure that at some level we've all considered, this concept is really fundamental to Judaism, but not talked about a whole heck of a lot in the Jewish lens, in the Jewish context. It's also very fundamental to NCJW. But what why and how? We really need to go beyond just saying it. We need to take a deep dive. And it's especially appropriate to do that today because, as we all know, yesterday was MLK Day. Justice needs to be on our minds. But first, I'm going to give you this little Jewish justice terminology concept 101 basic crash course. Okay, just so we have some vocabulary and some understanding. And to be honest with you, one or two of these things I just sneaked in and I looked it up. It still is sneaked. Snucked is really creeping into the language, but still sneaked. I sneaked into this because I just think they're kind of fascinating and related to justice. So the first thing is that I mentioned that Parshat Shoftim is where the quote comes from. So Parsha, we know, is the weekly section of Torah that we read. Shoftim is the Hebrew word for judges in the plural, Shoftim. We have a concept of a judge and a court issuing decrees. That's the idea of the judges that we're going to be talking about today, along with some other things. But I just wanted to take a segue for a second because we also hear, just for clarification purposes, and you're going to be so smart after this class, stuff that other people don't know and you never thought you needed to know, but I think you need to know. You hear about the judges as leaders in early Israel. And the most famous judge, at least for me, is the Judge Deborah, who was a brilliant and effective judge. But here's the thing, she wasn't a judge. That term, like so many, and I have come from a strong background in linguistics, and that was my profession for many years. I am very into correct conceptual translations. That is a literal translation and totally wrong. The judges during that time of Deborah and beyond were filling a leadership vacuum between the time of Moses and Joshua and then before the monarchy, the kings of Israel. This was kind of a Wild West time in Israel history. And a better translation, in my opinion, the word shoftim in that, or shofet for a judge, Deborah was a chieftain, and they were chieftains. They were typically military leaders. So that's just a little segue. That's not the kind of judge that we're going to be focusing on today. And the term is usually that she was a judge. That's what's used, telling you that I think we could do better and call her a chieftain. Okay, another vocab word in this quote is tzedek, and it's repeated, Tzedek, Tirdof. And Tzedek is generally translated as justice. More on that later. There's another kind of justice, other words for justice that have sort of a more firm, clear, pinpointed meaning of justice in the court. And that is the word din, which maybe you've heard, connected with some of you are, and forgive me, it's a little bit hard for me to see all of you, or as a matter of fact, it's impossible, is that, and feel free to, if there's something critical, you need to say, unmute yourself and wave your arms, and I'll be happy to recognize you. But din might register as something that you're familiar with from the word beit din, a house of judgment, which is a word that we use commonly for a religious court today. Okay, so those are the things that I just wanted to mention to you in terms of terms. The source of this quote comes from Deuteronomy, and it is, the full line is, justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that the Lord your God is giving you. There's a profound belief in this in this concept, not a custom, definitely a firm foundational concept. Tirdof is a command. You should, you must, you shall pursue. More on that soon. The word tzedek sounds like some stuff you know, right? Tzedek probably evokes the word tzedakah, and maybe you've heard tzaddik, a righteous person. Someone is a tzaddik. Those are all the same word. Tzedakah usually is translated as charity. I'm going to tell you again that this is one of my mistranslations in terms of the weaknesses or the capacity of English to have a parallel word. It's not only English. Conceptual translation is difficult and takes time. Literal translation, that's what's the stuff of which computer programs are made, but it doesn't tell the whole story. The tzedakah is usually translated as charity, but the word charity is from Latin. It comes from the word caritas, and it means essentially love. And that the concept is that you give because you have a loving, warm feeling about something. It is a statement, a concrete showing of your love. Judaism does not at all indicate that tzedakah is about love. Tzedakah means justice. It represents the just, the right thing to do. So basically, in Judaism, we give charity not because it feels right, but because it is right. More vocab. Sanhedrin. Typically, we think of it as this big court long time ago. That's correct. It actually existed until about the year 400, a little bit later, of the Common Era. And there were 71 judges on this. And there were also these local courts, and they had 23 judges. And I don't know, but I suspect that the fact that there were odd numbers was sort of a smart thing and very intentional. So the nature of these courts, the Sanhedrin, were kind of cases in violation of religious law. For example, using the produce that is supposed to rest on the sabbatical year. Also some very pragmatic things like land purchases and divorces, taxation, appointing kings, going to war. That was often the business of the Sanhedrin. After the fall of Jerusalem, and some years later, it took a while, the legal center of the Jewish world became the term that we know today, that's called the Beit Din. And during the Middle Ages, Jewish communities were self-governing. The term kehila or the term kahal or the term kal, depending on what part of the Jewish world you were living in, generally the Beit Din was their court. And frequently the local secular authorities would prohibit Jews from legislating in the secular courts. They were demanded, it was required that they litigated among other Jews. Of course, time changes things, and in modern times, Jews increasingly brought their disputes to the general civil courts. But today, a Beit Din is still very much a thing. And in most countries, it deals solely with religious matters like divorce or maybe supervision of the kosher laws. And there are also more insular communities where if parties agree, it serves as a court of, I say, arbitration, we would use that term today, particularly in business disputes or contractual disputes between individuals. So the Beit Din is still very much a thing, but there's a law in Judaism, which is the law of the land, unless it be deemed immoral, is our law. So basically the law are the secular courts for most Jews in most cases, and for all Jews in some cases. The major exception is in the state of Israel, where there's an extension, there's a lot of Beit Din courts, and they have, as you well know, complete jurisdiction over the Jewish population in all matters of personal status. What I mean by that is conversion and marriage and divorce. This is a sticking point. Probably, I'm guessing, for all of us on this call, for sure most of this on the call. It is very contentious. It is a cause of stress and disequality, and the new government is definitely taking steps to change this. And I can tell you, the leaders of the rabbinic courts are not happy. They're speaking out, but it's time. The stronghold needs to get weakened. Another concept that perhaps you've heard about is called the cities of refuge. I stick this in here just because it fascinates me. There were in biblical times and in ancient times, in the kingdom beyond biblical times, in the kingdom of Israel and Judea, there were 6 towns where the perpetrators of an accidental manslaughter, keywords accidental, meaning manslaughter, not intentional murder, but the perpetrators of an accidental manslaughter could claim the right of asylum, go there and be safe while awaiting trial. And what was the reason? To protect them from sort of an immediate gut revenge attack from the person who was harmed or the family that was harmed. It's kind of a precursor to asylum cities. It's not exactly the same. They're called cities of refuge, and it is a thing. Back to Judges, we're almost done with this little quick course, is that there is a teaching in Judaism that proves that we are not an exclusive religion. Judaism has never said that there is only one way to heaven, that it's our way or the highway. There are many religions that believe that they have the only, that they're right and everyone else is wrong, not the Jewish way. The Jewish quote is, "The righteous of all nations shall inherit a place in the world to come." That's according to Talmud. Also according to Talmud is a definition of who are the righteous of all nations. And 7 laws were put down for B'nai Noach, for the sons of Noah. Who are the sons of Noah? Well, and the daughters of Noah as well. That's all humanity since that time in our understanding. So the righteous of all nations have to do certain things, and there's forbidden sexual relationships. Murder is forbidden, and we have to make a distinction, folks. Murder and killing are different. Okay, we can talk about that at another time, but they're not the same. In Christianity, they are much more akin to each other than in Judaism. Big difference, not here though. Okay, theft. Another thing that is in the laws of being righteous, being under the B'nai Noach, the Noahide code, is no cruelty to animals. And of course, there are many different expansions of how that's applied. But the one that's in point today is that it also commands its followers to establish an orderly process of justice with courts. Any comments, questions, anything anybody wants to ask or need clarify, or did I teach me something? Leslie, haven't seen you in forever. Okay. I gave you a handout. Let me see if I can, without messing up too much, if I can pull it up. Let's see my screen share. How to record, okay. One moment, please. See if I can pull it. I'm referencing right now the NCJW document, which I thought was wonderful, prepared by National. And when I saw it some time ago, I saved it. I knew I would want it someday.
I just looked at your website and was reading the documents. That's why I was late. But it was your memos, which were written by you. But was there also another document from Council?
It was sent out today with the click on the link, and right before the link.
Oh, okay. I guess I missed it. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
And can I just say, so just to clarify, I want it in my head. You're saying that one of the requirements of being one of the righteous of a
nation, place in the world to come, yes.
Right. Would it be a nation must have an orderly process of justice?
Exactly.
Courts. So we won't name names, but we know there's places where that doesn't exist. Those people are automatically not eligible.
I'm not going to say that, because that isn't how Judaism thinks, because it's as individuals.
Individuals, okay.
As individuals, I'm not going to say that. That isn't the Jewish mindset.
Okay,
and I don't have a direct line to that, but that's a great question. But the idea is righteous nations have a system of justice.
Okay.
Okay, there is the obvious, which is I'm going to allude to it a little bit later, which is essentially that it is up to us to try to make that happen, which obviously is an important match for all of the reasons that any kind of social advocacy group, including Council, does. So we're not going to read through all this. I'm quite aware that all of you guys know how to read, but I just wanted to remind you that this is a great resource, I think, and it's very accurate. And to me, it's amazing. So much detail from thousands of years ago about and you could say it was written last week. You could absolutely say it was last week. And they talk about the problems in the judiciary and all this kind of thing. We're going to look at a few that particularly speak to me, right? A little bit more detail in a minute, but I just go into the last one purely as an example. You shall have one standard of law for non-citizen and citizen alike. This Spanish Torah scholar makes this very clear. The Torah wanted to make the point that in spite of differences of origins of certain people, the law is to be applied to them equally. Thus, a fair and impartial court is essential. There's also things about bribes, and there's also things about influence, and there's also things about feeling too much sympathy to a perpetrator who happens to be poor. They don't necessarily, just because they're disadvantaged, right away get the judgment. There has to be equal justice for all. But I loved this document, so hopefully you guys will take the time to read it and find it useful. Essentially, some of the salient ideas from it are that there are assumptions about what a judge should be so that we have confidence in the system. Independent and compassionate and prepared and all of those kinds of things. And there's the assumption that there's going to be equal justice, not influenced by the clothes you wear or your last name, those kinds of things. There is a big part, which we're not going to hit today because we talked about it in another class in great detail, about the oath and the sanctity of the oath. and your word. That is definitely a part of justice. You know that we've learned a lot on that in a whole class dedicated to that, and the concept of bli neder and all those things we talked about. Also, just in terms of something that you might find interesting, nobody's raised their hand and said, where's the jury in this? There ain't no jury. There's no jury in this. The witnesses play a critical role. We'll go into that in a little bit. Okay. The quote, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof, justice, justice, you must pursue. Is that second justice maybe a little bit superfluous? It's kind of strange because the Torah is really a concisely written document. So if we understand that every word in Torah holds meaning, so why the heck is it repeated? Well, there are lots and lots and lots of theories, and I'll spare you the 30 that I read and crystallize it down to 3 or 4, but I think it's really interesting. One of them is the statement is a direct call for action, a commandment to pursue justice. And there's really very little wiggle room when you say that 2 times. There should be no doubt in your mind that this matters, that it's important. Another way to think of it is that you have to establish it and then you have to use the system. It's not just enough to have it in place and then not make it work. In other words, it's not enough to have it look good on paper. It has to genuinely pass the test of being just. That particular line of pursuing it, making sure that that happens, is kind of a call to action for Jewish activists forever. Historically, it's the call to arms for social justice, action, tikkun olam, if you wish. Maybe there is the understanding that people understand what is just in different ways. There might be more than one voice in terms of what justice is. It's not, as we learned in other things about the Jewish way to argue or the Jewish way to creatively have a difference of opinion. It's really important in justice to understand that there may be more than one voice. I can kind of liken this to, if you recall that there was this historic friendship between Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, even though they were very, very different people. They somehow embodied, at least from my perspective, and as I read Judaism, the Jewish perspective of seeing and hearing and responding to each other's arguments. They taught us that that's really important in this world, seeing things through different eyes. What would this be if I didn't quote a rabbi? I've got to quote a rabbi. So the rabbi that I'm going to quote is Rashi, who's very famous from the 11th century, France. You know that his day job was he was a wine manufacturer because rabbis didn't get paid. So Rashi tells us that the repetition is calling our attention not only to the obligation of the judges to judge wisely, but of the people to seek out good judges. It's to make sure that the court system is a good one. I kind of said that before, but basically what it's saying is that once the system is in place, there continues a responsibility from the whole populace to make sure that it works, to use it effectively, and to keep a critical eye going on that particular thing. I think for me, being maybe a little bit less sophisticated, I'm going to just say that the reason it says Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof is because it's really important. And that the Torah is jumping out and waving its arms at you and saying, it's up to us to get this right. Thoughts?
Question.
Please.
Oh, yeah, I actually put it in the chat.
It's hard for me to see the chat. I'm manipulating quite a few screens. Please forgive me. Yes. What's your question?
Okay. Can you look in the chat room? The chat? That's my question.
Sure. 1 second. Well, the answer is yes. I'm not an expert. The question is, does Israel follow this? The answer is yes. With the thing that I mentioned before, and to reiterate it and tell you that I'm certainly not an expert in it. There is definitely a perception by many, many people in Israel, no matter where you are on the stream or the flavor or the politics or the observance kind of thing, which is that the rabbinic courts have gone off of the path of what it was meant to be and need to be pulled back in. That's, as I said, one of the stated parts of the platform of the new government, which is not so new anymore. That's the one aberration. But you know what? Making the voice heard that we need to do something is the Jewish way to do it. In terms of, yes, are there courts? Are there judges? Are there written laws? Yes, they do not have a constitution as we do. They have laws. I am not an expert. I need to review it. But in the general sense, yes, the justice system in Israel follows this justice system.
And I have a question. One thing in the handout that really stood out to me was where it says that you also, as a judge, cannot be influenced by who appointed you, by their viewpoints. And this has come up a lot in recent times about someone's background, their own personal beliefs, or who appointed them, how it will influence them. And in truth, being a judge, according to what we're reading today, it should have nothing to do with any of those details.
Of course, and we all want it that way.
Right.
The problem is, as in everything, judges are human.
Right, human.
And we're human. And there's always this inherent fallibility in all of these systems. And it's an ongoing process and it takes work. We're never done with this. So there's going to be aberrations all the time. And you're always going to have the bad apple in the barrel, or whatever the expression is, or maybe lots of rotten apples. Absolutely. But yes, what you said is brilliant. That's right. It's an important one to point out right now. I think without question, it speaks to all of us. Helen, do you have your hand up or no? Okay. Welcome. Okay. I'm going to share a screen, and one of the people who we've learned from before is Alav Shalom Rabbi Lord Dr. Jonathan Sachs, and he's going to talk to you for a minute about tzedakah as soon as I can get the video up. Actually, let me share a screen first so I don't have to go back. We have to do an ad because that's the ways of the world on YouTube these days. Let's see, taking a bit to load. Not sure why this is happening.
There are two kinds of mitzvot. There are the commands of self-restraint that hold us back from damaging the human or natural environment. And there are the positive commands of love, for the world as God's work and for human beings as God's image. Of the second, the greatest is tzedakah, love as justice, or sometimes translated as charity. The world is not always just or equitable or fair, and our task is to make it more so by helping those in need, sharing some of what we have with others. This act of sharing is more than just charity. It's a recognition of the fact that what we have from God. And one of the conditions of God's gifts is that we ourselves give. That way we too become like God, walking in his ways. The market creates wealth. That is its virtue, but it doesn't necessarily distribute it in such a way as to alleviate poverty, granting everyone the means of a dignified life, and that is its weakness. So there are two possibilities: either abandon the market or mitigate its negative effects. The first has been tried and failed. The second can be done in two ways, through the government by taxation and welfare, or through individuals. Governments can do much, but not everything. Tzedakah is Judaism's way of saying that each of us has a part to play. Every one of us must give. Tzedakah means both justice and charity, because we believe that they go hand in hand. Justice is impersonal, charity is personal. We call God Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. A king dispenses justice. A parent gives a child a gift out of love. And that is the meaning of tzedakah, an act that combines both justice and love. Giving to others is one of the most beautiful things we can do and one of the most creative. We create possibilities for other people. We soften some of the rough edges of the world. We help alleviate poverty and pain. We give God the sacrifice he most desires of us, that we honor his image in other people. Nothing more marks Judaism as a religion of love than its emphasis on tzedakah. We do not accept poverty, hunger, homelessness, or disease as God's will. To the contrary, God's will is that we heal these fractures in his world. As God feeds the hungry, so must we. As God heals the sick, so must we. We become good by doing good. We walk in God's ways by acting out of love.
Mm.
Let's get ready because I'm gonna show you one more brief one in a little bit, but sorry, I have a lot of things on my screen. Be with you in a sec. So maybe what you can deduce from this is that the word tzedakah is hard to translate. Up to this point, we thought it was easy, and I've kind of confused everybody and messed up your thoughts and made you think a little bit harder about that word, and that was actually my intention. It's hard to translate because it has lots of shadings of meaning, and justice is the key, the core, that's the root, and charity is certainly part of the embedded huge concept, but there's also righteousness and fairness and integrity, and it certainly means something more than the strictly legal sense of justice, that word din. It's very different from that other word for justice if you look it up in a Hebrew dictionary. It's not, they'll both say, justice will say tzedakah and tzedek and din, but the tzedek and tzedakah are really very much nuanced. There's an example that I'd like to share with you that really hit me. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge because you've loaned them something and they give you the cloak as a promise that they're going to return that, the law in Judaism is to return it to him by sunset because his cloak is his only covering that he has for his body. What else will he sleep in? This says that if a person is poor, and that's the implication from that quote, if a person is poor, you may not go to sleep holding their security. You have to return it at sundown so that they will be able to sleep in a garment. That means that tzedakah is not legal, hard justice in this verse. It means the situation in which a poor person has only a single garment that he's handed over to you as the lender as security, even though you have every right to keep that cloak until he repays the loan, you shouldn't do it. Acting on the basis of that right is just not right, to play on the word right. It's the wrong thing to do because it ignores the human situation of that person. That is a concept of tzedakah. One of the if you look at different editions of Tanakh Bible in synagogues, they're translated by different people. They're not all the same. And people nuance and people choose and people have their agendas for using certain words. And tzedakah is very often translated as charity. But there's at least one edition of current edition of Torah translation where it's not translated as charity. It's translated as justice tempered by compassion, which is a lot of words, takes a lot of space, but I like that concept.
Yeah.
Justice tempered by compassion. So it's justice plus for something, lack of something better. And that often means giving charity. Not the only way, but often means that. It's time to quote another famous rabbi. His name is William Shakespeare. We can learn from many different sources, and perhaps some of you are aware, and it's something that I've heard, not often, but regularly within my life and my studies, which is Jews are too much by the book, they're too much by the law, they don't have love. Christianity is love, love, love. Okay? That is overly simplistic. It's not true about Christianity, it's not true about Judaism, but in the mind of Shakespeare, in The Merchant of Venice, that was very much the belief at that time. Maybe you've heard this. This is Portia, and she says, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives, and him that takes. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We pray for mercy." So the implication is, if I may translate it into 2022 English, as I understand it, is that we, meaning Portia and the people she represents, are full of mercy, like gentle rain from heaven. And you, Jew, you're not going to see salvation because you only do justice. We pray for mercy, you want justice. So what's happening here with Rabbi Shakespeare is that he's expressing the medieval stereotype of Christian mercy through the voice of Portia against Jewish justice, pointing the finger at Shylock. And he entirely fails to realize, and he couldn't possibly realize it given the prevailing culture of that day, that in our world, justice and mercy are not opposites. They are totally melded together. In Hebrew, they're bonded together in a single word, tzedek or tzedakah. It's a concrete example in Merchant of Venice of the cruel misrepresentation of Judaism in Christian theology until very recent times. And I have to tell you from my experience that many Jews who don't know a lot about Judaism feel the same way. Judaism is too legalistic. On one sentence, if you just drop like anything, nothing can be crystallized into one sentence. It's very unfair to the person's concept. It's very unfair to Judaism to believe that. It's much more than that. It's complicated. So law, as seen in Judaism and the Torah, makes no distinction between the rich and the poor, or the powerless and the powerful, or someone who's homeborn or someone who's a stranger. Equality is a key part of this as well. I want to talk to you a little bit. Forgive me, I'm going to have a little bit of my beverage.
Carol, may I ask a question?
Please do.
It always seemed to me that the idea of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, was some of the basis for what you just said, the concept that Jews are for justice with no other circumstances. Does anybody else ever have that feeling? It bothered me.
Judaism does not teach eye for eye and tooth for tooth.
Where does that come from?
It's an original quote. Okay, that's a great, thank you, Leslie, because it gives me an opportunity to just remind and put in context something that is really important. Judaism is not literal. Bible quoting certain fundamentalist groups of religions are literal. In other words, it's the word, and it says that. Judaism has never been literal. There are groups of people like Karaites who have split off from the Jews because they stayed with the 5 books of Moses literally. We have practiced what's called rabbinic Judaism and really have. That's what which means, what is the message of that? And what is the application? I'm going to actually hit that one. I don't know if you took a sneak peek at my notes, but I'm going to touch that one a little bit in a second, or not in a second, in 5 minutes. But that's really, really important in terms of justice. You're going to hear certain religions, and Judaism ain't one of them, absolutely say that. This also relies to I think the one that I jumped to is the quote about homosexuality in the Torah. Also, Judaism does not do Judaism is the word I learned a long time ago, which sounds weird, but it works, is exegesis, which is you extract what the lesson is and the application is. That's just an example. Just like we're not really expected to believe that the world was created in 7 days, that would be a literalist thing. It's not rabbinic Judaism. It's not Judaism as it's been practiced for thousands and thousands of years. That the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth thing is one that it really has a lot of discussion. I'm not prepared as an expert, but we're certainly going to give you a hopefully some clarification in a very short time. So thank you so much for asking that. So my next topic that I'd like to talk about for a little while are judges.
Oh,
And I'm sorry, someone say something?
no, I'm just laughing.
Oh, okay. But I'm going to talk about it. We talked some about judges, and we'll a little bit more, but I wanted to sneak in here because that's my nature. I'm sneaky. Something that many, many years ago, my very wise baby brother taught me that has guided me a lot, and I just like to share it with you. It has the word judge in it, and it's an expression in Hebrew that I see a lot. Of course, I'm tuned to it because I use it, I believe in it. And it talks to the fact that all of us are judges. And in the human condition, we're always making judgments. And sometimes it's about concepts, sometimes it's about realities and experiences, and sometimes it's about people. The expression in Hebrew is dan lachaf zchut. Okay, dan, it sounds like the word I taught you a little bit ago. Din, beit din, judge. Lachaf, on the side of zchut, merit. We would say in English, judge kindly, or give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't judge harshly. I'd like to share with you a very brief 2-minute or less video on that I just wanted to include. Sorry, I gotta get out of. Why it's not reacting. I'm trying to collapse the screen, it's not reacting. I'm gonna try again. Short technical difficulty. I'm going to shut this and go back to it. Let's see if I'm more successful this way. Yes. I am smarter than the computer. At least I want to think I am.
This is the world's reusable cotton swab. It removes up to 5 times more excessive
I
wax.
can't cut out the
Recent studies
commercials until I get. Forgive me, I just want to check what.
Shabbat Shalom.
Just one moment. I think I'm at 2:30. I want to be at 2:30. Let's see how this goes.
And usually we reach a verdict based on superficial appearances, without evidence, without investigation, without information on the reasoning of others. There's a story about a father with 2 children riding a bus. The children were behaving wildly. They were very restless, bothering the other passengers. The father, on his part, looked out of the window and seemed detached from reality, detached from the mess his children were making. How did the other passengers judge him and the children? He's not a good father. He is detached from his children. The children are not educated. There is no discipline. Overall, the situation is bad. You know how it is. Israelis, they like to push their nose into business that is not theirs. So the passengers mentioned that to the father, that his children were not under control, and that he should do something about it. The father immediately responded, "Sorry for being detached. We are just in shock. We are returning home from the hospital, where their mother just died. I'll take care of the children." Yes, this example is extreme, but I want to emphasize that one piece of information can change our viewpoint.
That's. Are you able to see me now?
Mhm. Yes.
Okay, because I didn't hit stop share, but somehow we stopped share, which is good. That is an example of Dan Lachafzchut and rushing to judgment and not knowing the whole story. And I am doing better. I'm still somewhat guilty of it. This was definitely a thing for me, and perhaps for some of you. I remember once very clearly that I thought someone was the worst snob. She never said hello to me on the street or when I ran into her in the grocery store. I just really thought that she was obnoxious. And I found out lots of years later she was legally blind. I had no clue. And that really taught me something in terms of Dan Lachafzchut. Give somebody the benefit of the doubt because you really don't know. And the example that this gentleman just gave in this Dvar Torah, which was for Parshat Shoftim specifically, also speaks to that. I was once really upset at someone for not returning something that I was owed to me. And the truth was, with one word, that person gave it back immediately. It totally slipped his mind. So understanding this Dan Lachafzchut in terms of us being better judges, I just kind of sneak that in right now. Forgive me, but I have the floor and you're captive audience, so you just have to put up with me. So Dan Lachafzchut basically means give someone the benefit of the doubt instead of saying, how could they do this? You don't know what's in their head. We don't know their story. I'm amazed at all of the detail about judges and witnesses and things like that. I want to share some of this with you so that you too can be amazed. We got a little touch of it in the NCJW summary sheet document. But in terms of the things that, for example, there are many commentators, but one, Maimonides, was talking about competent judges. They have to be able to express their views in clear, well-chosen words and be conversant in most of the spoken languages so that they don't need the services of an interpreter. And every judge was required to have the following 7 attributes. Hard to find. Wisdom, humility, awe of heaven, a loathing for money, the love of truth, the love of people at large, and a good reputation. And in order to be appointed to a high court, they have had to have some sort of academic distinction and some intellectual recognition of their intellect. And ideally, they should have a skill beyond the judge stuff. In other words, know some real world thing, whether it be astronomy or mathematics or medicine, whatever it is, because then you can relate to the people who are giving their stories, giving testimony. Couldn't be too old or couldn't be childless when appointed. And they could be members of the Kohanim, the priestly tribe, or the Leviim, the Levites, or they could be Israelites. That was not a restriction in terms of being a judge, okay? There's a lot of stuff, and I'm going to skip some of this, but I thought maybe you would want to know who are ineligible to be witnesses or judges. Gamblers, a usurer, meaning one who charged a loan money at interest. A pigeon trainer, which I understand from a footnote means someone who raced pigeons. I guess that means someone who bet on pigeons, something like that. And people who violated the sabbatical year. You might be noticing a pattern here that I've referred to the sabbatical year. This is the third time, meaning every 7 years you're supposed to let the land lie fallow in the land of Israel. We're in a year like that now, and in order to let it rest, and you can't benefit from that produce. So someone who did that was not eligible to be not only a judge, but not even a witness. They have to be fair and they have to be honorable, and they shouldn't handle any cases if there are any personal relationships. Let me just tell you, I know I'm giving you a lot, but I'm going to say that I encountered probably 20 pages of fine print on this. So I'm just giving you a taste. As I said, I was just amazed at having thought about all of these things being considered, and pretty much all of them being relevant in some form, even today. Another thing is they're not supposed to be allowed, and this resonates, but not supposed to be influenced by past criminal records of the defendants. We've all seen that on the legal shows on TV. It's not relevant to the case, something that happened in the past. The defendant must be judged for the crime for which he or she is now being tried, not for any past transgression. It's pretty sophisticated. Now, the testimony, and this is one of the things that it is said that there's capital punishment is absolutely mentioned in the 5 books. It says, in fact, that people should be stoned to death. That was apparently the preferred way of killing someone. But the way this evolved in the Talmud, in terms of exegesis, in terms of the rabbinic understanding and law teaching of this, is that the only way someone could be put to death is, or for any testimony be accepted, is that you have to have 2 witnesses who witness the entire crime from beginning to end and who give the exact same testimony. Some of the commentaries say the exact same testimony means word for word. Some of it just say that the facts should be the same. But if one says, I believe they were wearing a green dress, and the other one says a blue dress, that exonerates the person. That's how strict it was. The 2 witnesses have very key roles, and it's very tight in terms of what testimony is damning of a person. So witnesses were important. Under rabbinic law, 10 types of witnesses were disqualified from testifying in court. I apologize for the first one. I'm not responsible. We're living in different times. We're going back 2,000 years. Disqualified were women because they were thought to be too emotional, slaves, minors, the mentally retarded, deaf mutes, this is literal, who could not hear questions or speak in response to them, the blind, who could not be eyewitnesses, relatives of the parties involved in the case, people personally involved in the case, a person without shame, I don't know what that means, that's the translation, and a wicked person, such as someone who uses the produce from the sabbatical year or races pigeons. That's actually a pigeon racer, it's in there. Okay, I remember that correctly. I want to talk about capital punishment as an example. On the surface, capital punishment looks like the perfect embodiment of justice. It's logical. What could be more the logical consequence, like if somebody takes a life, then you take their life. And the Torah, and you look at the literal 5 books, the original text, without the commentary in the margins, or without looking at Talmud, the Torah seems to unequivocally support the death penalty. Deuteronomy says, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, or foot for foot. Moreover, there are numerous biblical offenses that are punishable by murder, by stoning, by death, not by murder. Murder is one that is punishable by death. Forgive me, I said it wrong. So, but there's a much more complex perspective. Although the Torah portion affirms capital punishment, there's a deep ambivalence among the rabbis, among sages from that point on, in terms of the description of biblical executions. It says, let the hands of the witnesses be the first against him to put him to death, and then the hands of the rest of the nation afterwards. So if you were a witness to a crime, then it becomes yours, and someone would be convicted of it, often theoretically now from our perspective. If you were responsible for them being convicted, you have to begin putting them to death. It's your responsibility. So the requirement that the witnesses whose testimonies condemn the criminal throw the first stones forces them to consider whether they're prepared to bear the responsibility of taking a life. And the community's participation ensures that all Israelites share this responsibility. Blood would be on everyone's hands. In that way, no one is going to become numb or unemotional or stoic about capital punishment. So in the Talmud, the rabbis basically abolish capital punishment, primarily on the grounds that human justice systems are fallible and that executing wrongly convicted individuals is unacceptable. The death penalty should be left in the hands of God, so to speak. This is really prescient for where we are today when we know about so many people. Let's talk about Project Innocence or whatever. There's a considerable margin of error of people who are wrongly convicted. And Maimonides said years ago, as if he knew about today, it's better and more satisfactory to acquit 1,000 guilty persons than to put a single innocent one to death. To summarize, for many years, and when I say it's not quite 2,000, but just almost that, it's been in Judaism virtually impossible to sentence someone to death in the rabbinic courts. That's not true necessarily in the secular courts, of course. Comments, questions, thoughts? Ellen?
Yeah, as you were talking, I immediately thought about the short story, The Lottery, you know, the stoning and stuff. You're familiar with the story? And
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I never realized the connection. The other thing that I wanted to tell you is that as you were talking about tzedakah, I actually started crying because I was thinking about some things that my husband had done that I never really acknowledged, and what I do in terms of teaching, you know, students, a lot of them from minority groups and stuff, but I see them succeed. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
I never realized that about us.
It's very important. Thank you. To share what's in the chat, have I ever done a session on the history of the attitudes towards women in Judaism? Yes. I mean, I can tell you more about current than past, but I can resurrect it. It's probably 3 years. If there is an interest, just let me know. It is relevant and complicated, and it depends on your community. There have been 186 death row exonerees. That number is the same one I came up with, right? And is this Michelle who's putting this up? I'm looking by initials. I'm not sure. Support House Bill 138 and Senate Bill 103, which would abolish in Ohio go to nodeathpenaltyoh.com. Thank you so much. That is very much the Jewish way of looking at this. Now, there are always individuals in Judaism, but the truth is that if you talk about the Jewish way, anti-death penalty. I'm cutting short. There's a lot of stuff on that. The idea of there's one statement, I don't have it right in front of me. Maybe I do have it right in front of me. Just one moment. The Sanhedrin that executes a rabbinic court that executes once in 7 years is destructive. That was said without a source. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says every 70 years. Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say if we were in a Sanhedrin, no man would ever be executed. So it goes way back because Akiva is from about the year 170. It goes way, way back to no death penalty. It hits home. And another thing that hits home is that I just wanted to share. Well, let me just, I'll go in order because I don't want to omit anything. So this is something that probably is not a surprise to you, but it's the quote that we've used a lot today, Tzedek, Tirdof, is a rallying call for several social justice organizations, probably not only Jewish ones, but I only know about the American Jewish World Service comes to mind, and the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs comes to mind, and the JCPA, a Jewish Council on Public Affairs, come to mind. And there is one person whose name has come across in my world a little bit. I've never met her personally, and I'm going to read something that she wrote that's very brief. She is for the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs, and Avodah, have you heard, or some people say Avoda, which is what can I call it? America-based, what was the thing that was like reach for, the thing where you, like Peace Corps, but you did it in the United States. You do it, you know what I'm talking about? That social service, anyway.
AmeriCorps.
AmeriCorps, thank you. I think there's actually more than one, but that one works. Thank you for that help. This is kind of the Jewish version of that, Avoda. It still functions, and she's just speaking, and she addressed what we were talking about a bit. Why is it repeated, the word justice? Of course, I think my answer is the right one. It's because you got to pay attention. But what she says is that the double use of justice reminds me to be intentional and insistent on incorporating Tzedek into all aspects of my life. It tells me that I cannot opt into Tzedek when I feel it's convenient, and that there are no days off from pursuing justice. It calls on me to pursue my justice in my work, in my relationships with friends and family, and in my interactions with strangers, and how I spend my money, the movies I watch, the news I consume, and the things that I post on social media. So what's applicable about all of this today? What's inspirational for us, NCJW? I hope a little bit. I hope a lot of it. I hope that you heard something that resonates, that calls to mind an idea for you personally, for what's maybe troublesome that we have to work on. Essentially, tzedakah is an active verb that goes way beyond making a donation. And making a donation is absolutely tzedakah. I'm not saying not, but this is a much more complex, much bigger topic than perhaps we've thought of before. Yesterday was MLK Day. We learned a few months ago about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and his connection to Martin Luther King. I heard somebody speak. I had the privilege of being on a Zoom class on Martin Luther King Day with someone who was a 19-year-old volunteer, 19 and then 20 and 21-year-old at Southern Christian Leadership in the Ebenezer Baptist Church with Dr. King. And he said that before the march in Selma, the first march where there was so much violence, on Friday, he said, I need Rabbi Heschel to come down here. And he called him. And Rabbi Heschel is going, oy vey, it's Friday and tomorrow's Shabbos, and how am I going to get there? It's Sunday. and somehow he figured it out. He got on a plane and he got there. That iconic picture that all of us have seen a million times with them marching together. But that is, a part of the reason I feel that the timing of this session was good, because social justice is super important. And I have to take a little bit of a leap without time to do great detail and tell you that if you're interested, I can certainly direct you to the source. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who is a wonderful teacher of mine for many years and is getting very much up in years. Maybe you have heard of him or his wife, Blue Greenberg, who wrote something about an iconic book for how to run a Jewish household, book probably 40 years ago, who was a huge feminist years before it was in style. Anyway, Yitz Greenberg teaches from a rabbinic point of view and from a text point of view the importance of social justice, and is a huge advocate and makes a very strong argument. Whether, I don't know how you feel about it, and I'm not trying to tell you how to think, but he tells you the Jewish texts demand that we support affirmative action. And he documents this with Torah and Talmud. That's his thing. His name is Rabbi Yitzchak Greenberg. He's known as Yitz Greenberg. When I was maybe 25 years old, I had the privilege of having him in my living room for 10 minutes. There's a book out that just came out. It's a teacher source book, and it's on social justice and all. And I just wanted to tell you that there's these texts supporting these topics, which may resonate with us. I hope at least some of them do. Voters' rights, immigration, environment, capital punishment, gun ownership, obligations to animals, assisted suicide, giving money to people on the street, involvement in public affairs. All of this stuff is within that term tzedakah, or it should be. Now, can we all do all of it? Absolutely not. It's time to remind you that this is not a theoretical thing. The Hebrew text in this particular, in Shoftim, says lecha. This is for you, this law. Lecha, or for a woman it would be lach, for you. The Torah makes it perfectly clear that justice is an intimate issue. It's not really just about lofty ideals. It's not about something that's real obscure. It's not hypothetical. It's not remote. Justice, at least for us as Jews, at least in the Torah, is as real as any experience that we have in getting through the average day. Let's see how I'm doing. I have 5 minutes. I just want to, if I can, pull something up and share it with you. One of the wonderful people who is on this call, on this Zoom, her name is Rose, and she's a dear friend. And her voice sometimes quits on her, and she didn't ask me in any way to read this, but she apparently got the handout yesterday and looked at it, and I'm going to, without her permission, just read a little bit of what she wrote, because she said it so beautifully. Just reading it, meaning the handout, I could not stop from thinking of what a wonderfully democratic society we would be living in if indeed our courts would adhere to our Jewish law, to Torah, that spells out our responsibilities to see through our votes that judges should be, in truth, practice equality under the law for all peoples. Just think that if among the judiciary, all the way up to the Supreme Court, would, for one, practice the protection of human rights and not lollygag on things like the right to vote, such a glaring defect in comparison to our Jewish tradition of equal justice under the law for all. I leave you with a quote from Pirkei Avot that you've probably heard from Ethics of Our Fathers. There's a lot. It's for us. It's about us getting through the day in a just way. But remember, we can't do it all, and we're not expected to. As Pirkei Avot says, you're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. So the mission statement of National Council of Jewish Women absolutely articulates these values. But what I'm suggesting is that I need to work, at least me, on my own personal mission statement in terms of adding justice and focusing on that, in perhaps small ways and in perhaps large ways, but it's got to be in my lens, in my head, in how I act every day. Heavy idea, important idea. Leslie?
Carol, do you actually have a written personal vision statement for yourself?
I've had many over the years, yeah.
Wow. I never thought of that. As a marketing person, I can't believe I haven't. Wow, that's powerful.
I mean, there's one, and I'm not saying, it doesn't have to be paragraphs and such. There's one thing that has always been in my mission statement, and the other things change with me and with circumstance, and that is to make a difference. And I don't think that that's original to me. I think that that's very much a Jewish way of having a role in the world. There is a Jewish mission statement, which is essentially to leave the world, make a difference in the world, and do something that changes the world and helps in the repair of the world and the completion of the world. So it's not me original, but that's the place to start. Certainly not necessarily a place to end.
My guess is that we probably, most of us in our mind, have some vague, goals and things like that. But I'd be curious to know if other people have actually a written vision statement or that's very, and it's a good idea.
Ladies, thank you so very much for this opportunity to meet with you on this cold and dreary day. You give me a tremendous gift. I hope that you enjoyed this. I know our time is valuable, but I thank you so very much for giving me this hour and 13 minutes. Very much appreciated. I wish you well, and we have a class scheduled. I think I want to say it's March the 1st, which could be a little bit tricky in the sense that in terms of the way council sends out its announcements, we're the first day of the month. So try to get a little bit of a heads up sometime during February for it. Okay. Shalom.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheryl,
Yes.
at some point I need to arrange to give your book back to you.
Yes. Well, what's the plan on that?
I haven't heard from Cindy.
Oh, yeah, Cindy's out of town, but Cindy's out of town, but no, she went right now. I think maybe we'll let the snow go down a foot before we
right. Right.
make a plan.
I thought
Perlina, thank you so much for that lovely note, your kind words. You're you're muted, but if you can. And
I just have to share with you that Adina's note was just very special. And
thank you. I don't have a clue what she wrote, but thank you. I had the great honor of my only granddaughter having her bat mitzvah 2 weeks ago, and it was as I've unfortunately had to coin a phrase, a simchademic. We've had 3 simchademics in our family, a wedding and 2 b'nai mitzvah, but it was beautiful and special. So
Mazel tov.
We'll talk. I'm staying on just because I'm trying to read the there's quite a few messages, so I'm just going to do that. You're welcome to stay and watch me read, or you're gonna. Rose, I'm sorry. I wasn't going to ask your permission, but I wanted to share your wisdom and your words. So thank you for that note this morning. What were you doing up so late? It was dated. It was 2 o'clock this morning, Eastern time. I should have asked if anybody on the Zoom were attorneys. It probably were. Okay, I've read everything. I'm going to sign out. Okay, be well. Bye bye, everybody.